So we left off here. Many men hope that it will continue. Not all have given up the battle. The conservative bourgeoisie still see in the emancipation of women a menace to their morality and their interests. Some men dread feminine competition. Recently, a male student wrote in the Hebdo Latin, who knows what that is? Is that like a campus newspaper whatever? Every woman student who goes into medicine or law robs us of a job. He never questions his rights in this world, and economic interests are not the only ones concerned. One of the benefits that oppression confers upon the oppressors is that the most humble among them is made to feel superior. Thus, a poor white in the South can console himself with the thought that he is not, here's her word, and the most prosperous whites cleverly exploit this pride. Similarly, the most mediocre of males feels himself a demigod as compared with women. It was much easier for Madame de Montalon to think himself, Monsieur, to think himself a hero when he faced women. And women chosen for his purpose, than when he was obliged to act the man among men. Something many women have done better than he, for that matter. And in September 1948, in one of his articles in the Figaro Literature, Claude Mauriac, whose great originality is admired by all, could write regarding women: "We listen on a tone of polite indifference to the most brilliant among them, well knowing that her wit reflects more or less luminously ideas that come from us." So yeah, this is kind of similar. I remember a man in grad school saying to me that he can imagine a woman being as intelligent as him, but not as profound. And that's kind of what this reminds me of. Evidently, the speaker referred to is not reflecting the ideas of Mauriac himself, for no one knows of his having any. It may be that she reflects ideas originating with men, but then even among men, there are those who have been known to appropriate ideas not their own. And one can well ask whether Claude Mauriac might not find more interesting a conversation reflecting Descartes, Marx, or Guide rather than himself. What is really remarkable is that by using the questionable we, he identifies himself with St. Paul, Hegel, Lenin, and Nietzsche, and from the lofty eminence of their grandeur looks down disdainfully upon the bevy of women who make bold to converse with him on a footing of equality. In truth, I know of more than one woman who would refuse to suffer with patience Mauriac's tone of polite indifference. I have lingered on this example because the masculine attitude is here displayed with disarming ingenuousness. But men profit in many more subtle ways from the otherness, the alterity of woman. Here is a miraculous balm for those afflicted with an inferiority complex. So here she's doing something vaguely psychoanalytic. If you're interested in her take on psychoanalysis, she has a whole chapter on it in the second sex, where she takes up the details. Inferiority complex is most certainly a Freudian term, so that's what she's referring to. No one is more arrogant toward women, more aggressive or scornful than the man who is anxious about his virility. Those who are not fear-ridden in the presence of their fellow men are much more disposed to recognize a fellow creature in woman. So if you don't feel threatened, you're less likely to be, I guess, overly domineering or something. But even to these, the myth of woman, capital W, woman the other, that's kind of like this mystified woman, is precious for many reasons. They cannot be blamed for not cheerfully relinquishing all the benefits they derive from the myth. Yeah, so what's their interest in not subscribing to the myth? For they realize what they would lose in relinquishing woman as they fancy her to be, while they fail to realize what they have to gain from the woman of tomorrow. So this is her kind of really referencing the conclusion of the book, where she talks about liberation, like sort of what kinds of possibilities would there be for woman if we were freed from mystification, from being the other, refuse to pose oneself as the subject, unique and absolute, requires a great self-denial. Furthermore, the vast majority of men make no such claim explicitly. They do not postulate woman as inferior. For today, they are too thoroughly imbued with the ideal of democracy not to recognize all human beings as equals. So this is the idea that we have this competing ideology of equality that makes it difficult to, perceive oneself as the subject. But that's just sort of part of how privilege operates. Privilege operates by being, imperceptible or difficult to perceive by the person that has it. In the bosom of the family, woman seems, in the eyes of childhood and youth, to be clothed in the same social dignity as adult males. So this is this sort of separate but equal spheres, right? They're in charge of the domestic sphere, and that's just as valuable, let's say, as the public sphere, even though in the public sphere you have all control over the private sphere. Later on, the young man, desiring and loving, experiences the resistance, the independence of the woman desired and loved. In marriage, he respects woman as wife and mother, and in the concrete events of conjugal life, she stands there before him as a free being. He can therefore feel that social subordination as between the sexes no longer exists, and that on the whole, in spite of the differences, woman is equal. So if people just sort of abstract from their own individual relationships, they will not see this larger social pattern. That's what I think she's saying. As, however, he observes some points of inferiority, the most important being unfitness for the professions, he just attributes these to natural causes. When he is in a cooperative and benevolent relation with woman, his theme is the principle of abstract equality, and he does not base his attitude upon such inequality as may exist. But when he is in conflict with her, the situation is reversed. His theme will be the existing inequality, and he will even take it as justification for denying abstract equality. So what is she trying to say here? It's the difference between a kind of intellectual agreement that people are equal and a concrete day-to-day experience of equality where a person has a similar set of possibilities, a similar opening to freedom in society. So it is that many men will affirm, as if in good faith, that women are equals of man and that they have nothing to clamor for, while at the same time they will say that women can never be the equals of men and that their demands are in vain. So basically they have everything that they need and everything that they could achieve. It is, in point of fact, a difficult matter for man to realize the extreme importance of social discriminations, which seem outwardly insignificant, but which produce in woman moral and intellectual effects so profound that they appear to spring from her original nature. The most sympathetic of men never fully comprehend woman's concrete situation, and there is no reason to put much trust in the men when they rush to the defenses of privileges whose full extent they can hardly measure. We shall not, then, permit ourselves to be intimidated by the number and violence of the attacks launched against women, nor to be entrapped by the self-seeking eulogies bestowed on the true woman. Right, there's, always going to be backlash against feminism, which is like women have lost their way, there aren't real women anymore, ladies against feminism and that kind of stuff, like sort of like feminism is over, we need to get back to whatever gender roles, blah, 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 sort of conservatism. Nor to profit by the enthusiasm for woman's destiny manifested by men who would not, for the world, have any part of it. We should consider the arguments of the feminists with no less suspicion, however, for very often their controversial aim deprives them of all real value. If the woman question seems trivial, it is because masculine arrogance has made of it a quarrel, and when quarreling, one no longer reasons well. People have tirelessly sought to prove, here she's really showing herself to be a philosopher. We don't express anger, we reason well. People have tirelessly sought to prove that woman is superior, inferior, or equal to man. Some say that, having been crafted after Adam, she is evidently a secondary being. Others say, on the contrary, that Adam was only a rough draft, and that God succeeded in producing the human being in perfection when he created Eve. Woman's brain is smaller, yes, but it is relatively larger. Christ was made a man, yes, but perhaps for his greater humility. Each argument at once suggests its opposite, and both are often fallacious. So basically she's saying whatever you try to pin the inferiority or superiority of one gender over another, whatever you try to pin it into, whether that's a cultural narrative or some kind of biological differences, that all of those things can be, you can have an evaluative reversal where you say, no, that's actually what makes us superior. And so we're just ping-ponging back, trying to argue who's better or whatever, as a class or as a group. And she's really going to be against that, because the point here is open possibilities for everyone so that they can transcend themselves individually into projects. Each argument at once suggests its opposite, and both are often fallacious. If we are to gain understanding, we must get out of these ruts. We must discard the vague notions of superiority, inferiority, equality, which have hitherto corrupted every discussion of the subject, and start afresh. Yeah, so she's not going to be happy with a kind of everyone's equal, brush over differences kind of approach either. And we'll see what she wants to say about that. Very well, but just how shall we pose the question? And to begin with, who are we to propound it at all? Man is at once judge and party to the case, but so is woman. What we need is an angel, neither man nor woman. But where shall we find one? Still, the angel would be poorly qualified to speak, for an angel is ignorant of all the basic facts involved in the problem. I mean, okay, this is really old language here. Consists of each part. She's basically just saying, we need someone to, it's just not possible to get a position on gender without it coming from a perspective of a person. And we all come into a world that's already gendered. It looks to me as if there are, after all, certain women who are best qualified to elucidate the situation of woman. Let us not be misled by the sophism that because Epimedes was a Cretan, he was necessarily a liar. Her references, I mean, it is not a mysterious essence that compels men and women to act in good or bad faith. It is their situation that inclines them more or less towards the search for truth. Many of today's women, fortunate in the restoration of all the privileges pertaining to the estate of human being, can afford the luxury of impartiality. We even recognize its necessity. We are no longer like our partisan elders. By and large, we have won the game. In recent debates on the status of women, the United Nations has persistently maintained that the equality of the sexes is now becoming a reality. And already, so, 1947, right? These are arguments for basic equality, not arguments for, what that equality would look like in practice. This is just trying to get those things enshrined and recognized in sort of public institutions and the law. And already some of us have never had to sense in our femininity an inconvenience or an obstacle. Many problems appear to us to be more pressing than those which concern us in particular. And this detachment even allows us to hope that our attitude will be objective. Here she's talking about, when she talks about escaping feminine trappings, she's talking about not being forced to get married to be able to live independently or something like that. That's the level that she's dealing with. Still, we know the feminine world more intimately than do the men, because we have our roots on it. We grasp more immediately than do men what it means to a human being to be feminine, and we are more concerned with such knowledge. I have said that there are more pressing problems, but this does not prevent us from seeing some importance in asking how the fact of being women will affect our lives. What opportunities precisely have been given to us and what have been withheld? What fate awaits our younger sisters and what directions should they take? These are normative questions. It is significant that books by women on women are in general animated in our day less by a wish to demand our rights than by an effort toward clarity and understanding. As we emerge from an era of excessive controversy, this book is offered as one attempt among others to confirm that statement. But it is doubtless impossible to approach any human being with a mind free from bias. The way in which questions are put, the points of view assumed presuppose a relativity of interest. All characteristics imply values, and every objective description, so-called, implies an ethical background. Rather than attempt to conceal principles, more or less definitively implied, it is better to state them openly at the beginning. This will make it unnecessary to specify on every single page in just what sense one uses words such as superior, inferior, better, worse, progress, reaction, and the like. If we survey some of the works on women, we note that one of the points of view most frequently adopted is that of the public good, the general interest. And one always means by this the benefit of society as one wishes it to be maintained or established. For our part, we hold that the only public good is that which assures the private good of the citizens. So, I don't know exactly where she is here. I'm trying to put it in sort of political terms. Basically, that you can't have a philosophy of the public good at the expense of the private good of citizens, which has been a bit of a struggle for women because, you know, their struggles in the home have been thought of as for a greater public good. And so she's saying the two have to be tied together. We have to hold both of them. We shall pass judgment on institutions according to their effectiveness in giving concrete opportunities to individuals. But we do not confuse the idea of private interest with that of happiness, although that is another common point of view. Are not women of the harem more happy than women voters? Basically, you have to think that right now she's an existentialist, so the way that she would like society set up is such that one is able to project their own freedom into the world through actions, transcendence, activity. Happiness is something that one chooses because of this sort of existential radical freedom. So she would not see it as a good idea to say, well, the point of society is to make people happy, or that we need to make sure women are happy. That it's not about that. It's about securing freedom. And then if you manage to make a happy life out of that, that's great. Yeah. And so that's why she's just sort of saying, like, you know, what is it even to be happy? Other people can be happy. Is the housewife happier than the working woman? Is it not too clear just what the word happy really means, and still less what true values it may mask? There is no possibility of measuring the happiness of others, and it is always easy to describe as happy the situation in which one wishes to place them. So like, oh, no, cleaning makes you happy. You're always happier when the house is clean, so you should do the cleaning, that kind of stuff. In particular, those who are condemned to stagnation are often pronounced happy on the pretext that happiness consists in being at rest. See, this actually relates to a lot of her other writing that comes before and after, which is this idea of rest as being not just like taking a nap, but as like a break from your transcendence. So, you know, think about things like decision fatigue. You know, the existentialists have a little bit of an issue with that because they don't want anybody to abdicate their freedom. And the idea would be, well, I rest being like, I want a break from my using my freedom in the world, and that's of supreme value for the existentialist. So that would be an issue. This notion we reject, for our perspective, is that of existentialist ethics. Okay, I don't need to explain it. She's right there. Every subject plays his part as such, specifically through exploits or projects that serve as a mode of transcendence. He achieves liberty only through a continual reaching out towards other liberties. There is no justification for present existence other than its expansion into an indefinitely open future. Every time transcendence falls back into immanence. So immanence is sort of where you just take possibilities from the past and re-enshrine them, and you don't create any new value through your projects. That's why she says actually a lot of really controversial things about reproduction and child rearing, that it is just immanence. Anyway, read other chapters for that. Stagnation, there is a degradation of existence into the en soi. So that's in itself. So the en soi is like an object, or quite literally like a stapler or something. The brutish life of subjection to given conditions. So she thinks that actually through oppression, we have our subjectivity taken out of us, and we are just sort of made into an in itself. The contrast to this is the pour soi, which is for itself. The brutish life of subjection to given conditions and of liberty into constraint and contingence. This downfall represents a moral fault if the subject consents to it. So this is her issue. Women always have the possibility to be the for itself, but if they are made into the in itself and then go, okay, yeah, I'm the in itself, I'm not going to try to push and project my transcendence. She has an issue with that. If it is inflicted upon him, it spells frustration and oppression. In both cases, it is an absolute evil. Every individual concerned to justify his existence feels that his existence involves an undefined need to transcend himself, to engage in freely chosen projects. So she thinks that this is true. This is not a gendered fact. Every individual concerned to justify his existence, so this is the why am I here, what am I doing, feels that his existence involves an undefined need to transcend himself. Put myself into projects, express myself, whatever, to engage in freely chosen projects. Yes, and that project is more important to me if I'm the one who chooses it. Now, what peculiarly signalizes, this is weirdly translating something, situation of woman is that she, a free and autonomous being like all human creatures, nevertheless finds herself living in a world where men compel her to assume the status of the other. They propose to stabilize her as an object and to doom her into immanence, since her transcendence is to be overshadowed and forever transcended by another ego. This is interesting to me to make connections to the end part of the course, where we're going to be talking about sexual assault and objectification. This idea of stabilizing someone as an object and dooming them to immanence, since her transcendence is to be overshadowed and forever transcended by another ego, which is essential and sovereign. So this idea that it's part of a gender dynamic that one person has more freedom and transcendence than the other. The drama of woman lies in this conflict between the fundamental aspirations of every subject, who always regards himself as the essential, and the compulsions of a situation in which she is the inessential. How can a human being in woman's situation attain fulfillment? What roads are open to her, which are blocked? How can independence be recovered in a state of dependency? What circumstances limit women's liberty, and how can they be overcome? These are the fundamental questions on which I would fain throw some light. This means that I am interested in the fortunes of the individual as defined not in terms of happiness, but in terms of liberty. Quite evidently, this problem would be without significance if we were to believe that woman's destiny is inevitably determined by physiological, psychological, or economic forces. Hence, I shall discuss, first of all, the light in which woman is viewed by biology, psychoanalysis, and historical materialism. Next, I shall try to show exactly how the concept of the truly feminine has been fashioned, why woman has been defined as the other, and what have been the consequences from man's point of view. Then from woman's point of view, I shall describe the world in which women must live. And thus, we shall be able to envision the difficulties in their way as endeavoring to make their escape from the sphere hitherto assigned them. They aspire to full membership in the human race. So, the rest of the book is very long. The first half is called Facts and Myths, and it talks about what has been said about woman by dominant paradigms such as biology, psychoanalysis, historical materialism, and then she goes into sort of cultural myths and mythologies. And then the second half, lived experience is what it's called. She goes into kind of what it's like to come up in that world and negotiate your freedom with all of those roadblocks, and how how women negotiate their freedom in light of all of these mystifications and sort of social structures that work through that absolute subject and essential other dynamic, and that we always have that possibility for contestation and freedom. Okay, that's the introduction to the second sex.